Well, good morning, everybody. Thank you for joining. I'm Patricia Lalanda, partner of Loida Abogados, a law firm based in Madrid that has been advising clients for over 40 years now, especially in the entertainment industry, specifically gambling, both land-based and online, both for Spain and all over the world. We've been advising in the specific topic that we are going to be talking about today, compliance. We'll figure it out in a couple of minutes what that is really about. And I, of course, want to thank SPC for asking me to moderate and participating in this panel and ID Now. And a special thank you to the rest of the members of the webinar, Dee, Marije, Roger. And please take a moment now to introduce yourselves to the public. Dee, please be my guest.
Hi, thanks, Patricia, and thank you, ID Now, for inviting and setting up this webinar today. I'm Dee. I'm a lawyer who has been working in gambling for the last 12 years. I have worked on the B2B and B2C side, dealing with regulators all during my tenure in this gambling industry. I've seen a lot of changes. One from a simple licensing procedure to one very complex as regulations have developed. And I'm based in Malta.
Excellent. Marije.
Hi, thank you very much for inviting me and taking the opportunity to speak in this panel. I'm a lawyer by profession. I have over 10 years of experience in the gambling industry. Currently, I work as a Chief Compliance Officer within TonyBet Group, which is a B2C online gambling operators. We are live and have licenses in some of the most regulated jurisdictions like UK, Netherlands, and Spain. So we are facing the challenges that we will be discussing this morning.
Thank you, Marije. Roger.
Yes, good morning, everyone. So my name is Roger. I'm responsible for all things gambling here at ID Now. We're doing identity verification for the gambling community and making sure that all the players are safe and that everything is going in the right way.
Okay, well, thank you for those intros. So let's just cut to the chase and start with today's main topic, compliance. One of the first questions that we usually ask ourselves is when clients require our assistance in this topic is, what do our clients think or believe or understand compliance is? There are some of them that understand that it's a broader concept, which I believe is more towards the governance concept. And then there are others which believe in a more strict concept of compliance, more so that concept that takes care of all those specific areas in which where you develop, implement, and monitor certain policies, you will be at a certain degree exempt of any legal consequences. Those areas specifically are AML, GDPR, well, data protection, tax, and labor. However, within the gambling area, this has also come into action from, like Dee said, practically 10, 15 years to today, regarding that type of how the gambling companies have to structure and not only be aware of those areas that I've mentioned, but also of specific regulatory and technical legal compliance. So whether it's the core, from my understanding, whether it's the more government of a company's concept or to the very specific regulatory compliance, obviously all that has an impact in the company who has to enter or is active in all of these jurisdictions. So as Dee has mentioned, there have been many changes along all these years of regulation to today. So one of my first questions is this: what do the panelists believe compliance really is about? Do the corporations, do the entities that you work with understand in full what is under the scope of compliance? Marije, for example, do you want to take it the seat?
Sure. I think that's a very good question. Compliance in the online gambling sector is a very complex concept itself, since it has in the online gambling ecosystem so many actors like the regulators, like operators in the online casino and sports betting side, the business providers, and marketing and professional marketing professionals and customers, which are keeps the industry alive. All these actors need to interact in the implementing all the regulatory requirements. My experience while I work as chief compliance officer, I think is at the end for the company, everything which has a regulation will be compliant. So we need to make sure. So I see this as like a broad area of the regulations. Anything that can have an impact in the business should be overseen by the compliance function. For me, the most relevant ones would be like the regulations from the gambling perspective, also like the technical side, but especially like nowadays how things are developing, the marketing restrictions and also responsible gambling areas.
Okay, great. Yeah, there's, as you said, there's so many things that need to be overseen. Is this really a one person's job? Z, what do you think?
I think a lot of companies are waking up to this over the past few years, that compliance is essential to a successful and sustainable business. And as Maria said, it touches all aspects of your business. It's not just your gambling regulations, it's your technical regulations, your employment laws, your IP laws. Everything um, is is centralized into compliance. But compliance in one person or even a couple of people cannot do everything. So you have to have a philosophy, a culture's philosophy of we all want to be compliant. And you have to have an open philosophy as people ask questions and ask the right questions so that they're always thinking, what do I need to do good things? It's essential to an organization and it is essential for success and longevity. You know, you have to weigh the balance of your risks of what are the highest risk areas of compliance in my organization? How do we deal with that? What are our options to deal with it? And is it something that we want to take on board? So compliance is essential. Every area of the business is affected by compliance.
Okay, so you're more in the broad concept of compliance, which is a concept that's being managed a lot lately. So, what? Just one question there. You put it as a question mark. Is this something we want to take up? Is there an option to being non-compliant in a regulated market?
I believe the option of being non-compliant comes with a huge amount of risks. You know, there's levels of risk that you should be having forefront of your mind and evaluating what happens if I'm not compliant. That's the question you should be asking every day. Not how do we know we're compliant? How do we know if we're not compliant and dealing with that as quickly as and efficiently as possible? Um, so, you know, I don't think there's an option of being non-compliant, but you have to evaluate your risk levels within the board and set the direction from there.
Correct, correct. And I also want to, the key takeaway that I like a lot, it's the philosophy. I think it's very relevant. When you have within the philosophy and the culture of a company, compliance policies that turn out to be obvious to employees at the end of a couple of years, I think that's obviously the best way to move forward. And for example, in GDPR regulation, they made it very clear that you need to be compliant from the beginning and from the design of the structuring of the business, not afterwards with patches and solutions and so on. So that's a very good key takeaway, the philosophy of compliance within a company. Okay, great. We'll hold on to that idea as well and continue with it a little bit later. But Roger, from the provider point of view, how do you envisage that providers can help these aching operators, both B2B and B2C, with their compliance? Now we know that you're specialized in KYC fraud. So tell us a little bit of your view on all this.
Yeah, I think just to also catch on to the thought of Marika and Dee, I think compliance. If we take it back maybe to 2015, 16, it was almost seen as a burden in a business. Oh yeah, we can't do business because of compliance, yada yada yada. But now, more compliance is an enabler rather than a burden. And it enables you to operate a successful business in a lot of difficult markets, right? Because we have a lot of difficult situations out there where the regulations just basically are from A to Z, anything you like nowadays. And I mean, from a supplier point of view, what our job really is to make an operator's life easier. Provide the tools to automate certain things. Provide tools to scale the business as well, and also to provide tools to um, just give the tools to the team itself, to fight fraud, or to fight anti-money laundering, an example, right? So it's sorry, to essentially support anti-money laundering, and yeah, to really help those guys in order in order to operate in a way. And us as suppliers, we really work is also giving ideas to operators, how you might want to change certain things, how you want to enforce certain things in a different way. And yeah, for us, I mean, compliance is yeah, I mean, in the end of the day, we have to enable them to be compliant, and that's our main part really in this chain.
So just being part of the solution. And how do you manage from, again, from your own provider's point of view, to be able to implement each and every one of the jurisdictions with their different nuances and specific requirements within your own tool? Is this something that's easy, or you're also having a hard time?
I mean, sometimes it's challenging because, as we all know, not every regulator has a very black and white approach where, an example, in certain cases you can interpret one phrase in three different ways, right? So we also have to be on top of that. And also for us, I think it's more a case of, okay, we have to be actually prepared for two or three scenarios rather than just one. So that's the difficulty here. It's just basically, yeah, being able to really supply a solution that suits every operator, and not just one, because compliance is not an off-the-shelf solution. It's a really a solution that is tailored to every company's vision, KPIs, needs, right? So for us, that's a difficulty really, to finding a solution that works in many different ways. But we also have a great regulatory team that always speak to regulators, that always are looking for new regulations, etc. Because we need to stay on top of the game, because if we slack, it might then take 2 or 3 months to essentially implement that solution, and our customer, the operator, would lose that time of not being able to operate. So
Mhm.
for us, it's really staying on top of the game and being able to provide 3 or 4 different interpretations to one sentence, an example.
Okay, okay, yes, as a lawyer, I agree totally that there are three or four interpretations of each regulation that's possible. So two takeaways from what you've just mentioned. One of them, which is, I think, on a global note, very relevant. We are not anymore in the era of 2011, 2012, where compliance was seen as a burden. I've seen that grow. I think that the decision makers in the operators, and the Marike, correct me if I'm mistaken, they've already acknowledged that this is part of their life, most of them. So we're not facing those challenges where you as uh, providers have to actually sell these solutions, but more or less sell the benefit of your specific solution. So that's something that we've gained. There are other industries that are, I believe, where the gambling industry was back many years ago regarding compliance. For example, I mean, we have the big example these past weeks of FTX, the centralized crypto exchange, where there was a complete failure of not only compliance but governance in general. So I'm pretty sure that the gambling industry does not want to go back to that road and cannot afford going back to that road because it affects the whole gambling industry's reputation, which is right now jeopardized in many jurisdictions. And I think that we're definitely going in the right direction. So that's one of the key takeaways of your intervention, Roger, right now. And another one is that you're adapting, as you said, you're adapting to each jurisdiction and you want to be ahead, right? But what is, Mari Khadi, whoever wants to take it now, what is the key feature of a KYC provider or a provider that's going to help you with fraud prevention and AML? What is the key functions that you look for these type of providers?
Like, from my point of view, I think that the key issue is how this is going to be effective from a multi-jurisdictional point of view, and how is this going to be integrated in our platform, in the sense that all the information that is like reverted to that back office can I be used directly for our from our teams, or is this something that we need to do like another step on that, because that will take us like a lot of resources and time. And in order to be efficient, this is one of the first questions that I will ask to a specific provider.
Mhm. I would say, Maria, I fully support you there. I would also look and see how good their fraud detection tools are. We know there's very sophisticated fraudsters out there, and trying to stay ahead of the game, as Roger said, is a part of choosing, selecting, trying out the right providers. Um, if people want to defraud you, they will be try to be one step ahead of you, manipulating their passports, whatever, anonymous accounts. So fraud detection, OCR reading, being able to draw flags ASAP as quickly as possible, so that the good users can go on, but the bad ones, or the suspicion of bad, is flagged to you straight away. And then we can take over manual intervention and see, do we need to run these through again? And the quickness of the results as well. It's very important for us to be able to detect any manipulation in documents.
Yes, and Roger, before you can answer those two comments, I would like to add another one as well. And this one from a consumer point of view. So we're in the Amazon era, and I think that one of the key features that operators need and to suit consumers' desires is everything to be very quick. Everybody wants Amazon, like Amazon. You just buy that moment. Don't bother me. I want the product. So I think with those three observations, what do you believe that could be the most relevant, or how are you working around the technology to be able to comply or to abide by these needs?
I mean, yes. In the end of the day, our solution is of course built for operators and by operators. So all the feedback that we get is being implemented in those things, and like you said, and just to put on top of that, I think players don't remember a really good experience when onboarding because they were identified in 3 or 4 seconds or whatever it is, but they will remember a really bad one. And if your verification takes an absolute age, and you keep trying and you keep trying, eventually you will just go somewhere else. Because I mean, let's be honest. I mean, by now, in pretty much every market in Europe, you probably have another 50 operators you can go with, or another 50 brands you could open your accounts with, right? So for us, yes, 100%. It's really important to stay ahead of the wave of the fraudsters. To know what the trends are. Yeah, the good thing is an example for us, we work with Interpol, so we kind of know the kind of trends when it comes to also the documents from where are being the most fake ones, an example in a trend, so we know, okay, we should be more vigilant here. But it's also really to innovate the product as we go on, because not only do you have the typical um, um, let's say fraud scenarios where someone might change a document, but they might also change, an example, the picture of the document. They might change their name in order to get as many bonuses as possible, or they might change, certain details in whatever they're putting in. So, for the software, it's a must that we see those things, that we report those things immediately, and that it doesn't take over 24 hours, or I would say even it shouldn't take longer than 5 minutes anyway. And that's certainly the case, that it should be for everyone. I mean, we know when you come to suppliers, everyone has the greatest software, everyone has the greatest product, everyone has the best conversion rates, everyone has the best fraud engine and whatever. But in the end of the day, and I always say that it's the same product, just with a different color and logo. And it's really for us to have certain things, our unique selling points, to have the nuances in order for it to be really effective. And that's really what we are focusing on, and what the industry is focusing on. I mean, there is a lot of really good suppliers out there. I mean, I've been on a few exhibitions actually in the last few weeks, and there is a lot of really really good suppliers that have really good technology, and you can see that they're doing exactly that, to stay ahead and to fight fraud.
Excellent, Roger. Sorry, Marije, do you have an additional question? Go ahead.
I agree. I agree with Roger. I mean, when you see the technical developments, the suppliers are doing fantastic things, with being able to a reader, like whatever they're developing, whatever the likes of Apple are doing, taking that philosophy, embedding it into their platform, and be able to produce super fast results. And it's amazing to see what they can do now, as to what was maybe 10 years ago, where it's the fast pace of technical development that we look for with our suppliers and supporters in this industry. Without them, we're not going to work. We're not going very far, right? So it's the fast pace of technology that we're looking for as well when we're choosing our suppliers.
Marije, you had an additional question?
Yeah, I was going to ask if you think that technical developments will eliminate the need of having like individuals with that expertise, also like for the manual reviews, and to be familiarized with the specific IDs for a country, and also like the language. I think it's one skill to be really used there.
Um, I mean, some suppliers might tell you, "Hey, our solution will eliminate the need for 5 or 6 headcounts." I mean, to me, it's just no is my answer, and why? It's because machines don't have emotional intelligence yet, I guess, or if we will ever have it. They don't have the cultural knowledge. They don't know exactly what the culture is about, what that person is about, what are the circumstances, and all of those things. So, to me, and I think right now, as it is, I think a hybrid setup is the best way, because because you essentially get the input from the machine, that will then be processed with all of the knowledge from all the training courses that obviously everyone in those teams and those compliance teams has done, and with all the experience through the years, and then you can make a very good educated decision. But I don't think that machines will ever replace um, the whole setup, right? Whether that's AML, whether that's responsible gambling, whether that's customer onboarding or player onboarding. Sorry, um, I think you still need a human aspect in there in order to make decisions that are kind of done, with all of the inputs done and with all that, experience and emotional intelligence on top of that as well.
Mhm. We never say never. That's what they say, Roger.
Yeah, never say never, but yeah, unless we get obviously in an iRobot situation. But
Right.
as you saw in the film iRobots, emotional
Yeah,
intelligence is not the best of the robots, right? So
definitely, definitely. And also, what's very interesting from a data perspective, having machines, having a computer take decisions so it's so delicate, such as not being not letting a person be able to play or not, is perhaps, as I was saying, could be very delicate to have a machine completely decide over the whole path of those elements. So that is indeed something that obviously I understand that operators are looking to be as efficient as possible, and sometimes it's seen that the technology can substitute the headcount, as you've mentioned it, the people. But in some ways, and from a legal perspective, it is actually positive to have human beings committing errors, because most of the times when there's an error committed by the company, because in most of the jurisdictions, companies can now commit crimes and can commit infringements themselves as an entity. When you are able to prove that it was that all, the entity itself had all its procedures in place, all the policies were monitored, and that again the governance was well taken care of, but at the end of the day it was a human's failure, usually that helps a lot in the entity's case before a court. So again, humans committing errors is actually more defendable than the machines committed errors before a court.
Mm.
So that would, so we have a question right now, and please, whoever's watching us, feel free and comfortable to lodge all the questions. And the first one is asking, what is the role of an external law firm in a multi-jurisdictional compliance scenario? Okay, so that's definitely for me, I guess, but I would like also to hear your feedback, the Marije and Roger, because I'm sure you work with law firms. But from my perspective, I think that a specialized law firm can provide that updated vision of each jurisdiction, of what's going on in each jurisdiction. Sometimes we see that the day to day of the chief compliance officers is handling many areas, AML, et cetera, et cetera. So if at least you have that accompanying external, again, like Roger, provider that's going to make your life a little bit easier, and it's going to be able to give those red flags in the appropriate moments, well, then I think that that's our key role here. And without a doubt, it's such a complex uh, uh, area, with the industry, from a regulatory perspective, with such level of enforcement, which we can talk about now in a couple of minutes, and the sanctions are so high that I just believe that the more help and the most efficient, the better. So that I hope that answers that. Mhm. I don't know if Dee, Marike, Roger, you agree?
Totally. I would never go to a law firm that does not have specialization in the topic that I want advice on. I wouldn't ask an employment lawyer about gambling law. I mean, sometimes people think lawyers know everything about the law. It's not true. It's like, oh, sorry, I'm not an encyclopedia. I've known everything that the law. So specializing in the law of the area that you want advice on, because gambling law is not always prescriptive, right? I mean, look at the UK. The greatest challenges we have out there is like, okay, what do they mean? And that's where you're assessing your areas of highest risk, and your risk tolerance, and you want to make sure you've got an experienced, independent review, because the company can be quite biased inside, and I want to eliminate bias within our organization. See, what would the outside person think? So going to a multi-jurisdictional law firm, but where they have direct experience in those markets,
Local.
is absolutely paramount when you're dealing with high-risk areas.
Mhm. Mhm.
Yeah, I completely agree, and I think that's where you go, like external consultancy can add a lot of value, because sometimes regulations, they are not black and white, and it's a matter of interpretation, and taking that interpretation only on one side is quite risky, in my opinion. So always having someone with experience in the subject is a must.
Yeah, and on top of that as well, I mean, like an example from our point of view, I think we would never ask a German lawyer about the situation in Ontario, an example, right? So we would always go to, go to the local knowledge, right? So whether that's an example, I don't know, Jörg Hofmann in Germany, you've got obviously Richard Williams, David Clifton in the UK, you've got, Patricia Lalanda, of course, in Latam and Spain. So, I think it's always that local knowledge and experience that you need to have in order to make those educated decisions. So for us, when we set up new markets, etc., we always go to the local experienced lawyers when we need to, because like they will know everything inside and out. And before I go to someone that needs to study the law in that country for various hours, you're probably 20,000 euros down already. So yeah, always use the local heroes, as I call them, in order to get your solution right.
Yes, it's always ASP, right? As soon as possible, Roger.
Yes.
So we'll continue on that note. We have another comment. I think it's a comment, not a question, from Tal Spielman. Sorry if I didn't pronounce that properly. So she is indicating that it is not enough to have policies and procedures. You need to prove the implementation of those. 100% correct.
Mm-hmm. Agreed.
Uh, yes, you obviously you could be the best in class, but nowadays, you need to prove you are before the courts, before the regulators. And I think that that's a strategy that companies are also taking up. Marije, do you see that the operators and Roger are they making special efforts to show how compliant? So this is actually a whole new setup for the compliance itself. Is this something that's happening to your eyes?
Absolutely, 100%, as well as the governance. And there's an internal audit function, and we've got internal auditors ensuring that what we say in our policies and procedures we're actually doing. So they are checking on what operational staff are doing to ensure we're compliant. Yeah, and therefore they can spot any issues and raise it and escalate it ASAP. It might be a technical issue, it might be, just a lack in procedures. The minute that's what we're looking for, we're looking for the non-compliance parts of the policies and procedures. Policies and procedures, like law, are set in the past. So they constantly also need to be updated, because your regulator or your auditors will look at them and go, well, prove that you did that. If you say you did it, show me. And you have to show them. It would be kind of negligent to write the most perfect looking policy and procedure without actually satisfying yourself that it is being done within your organization, and giving you peace of mind so you can sleep at night as well.
Yeah, I completely agree. And also, I think like we should have like an internal auditor who challenge us and ask the difficult questions, so that you are like in a position that you need to face whether you are able to reply or not. So that will help you like to develop this compliance culture within your organization.
Mhm.
So summarizing, it's very nice to have the best policies, but if you keep them in the drawer of your office, they won't be for any use, none whatsoever. Okay. So we were talking about the multi-jurisdiction, Roger, so From your experience, which is the most complex jurisdiction where your own product has had troubles to adapt to the requirements of the regulation?
Um, I think to be honest, for us, it's not as hard, I would say, apart from maybe where you have like certain situations, like an example, where in Brazil, we essentially extract an example the CPF number of the document in order to check it against the government database, right? So that's probably the, let's say, some of those things. And actually saying that, probably Netherlands, because we have to black out the BSN number on documents, an example. So that also takes obviously some time to adapt, because we only allowed to show the document without the actual BSN number. However, the operator needs the BSN number to then change against the government system, right? So it's like those things can be tricky sometimes, because you speak to a lawyer, they tell you one thing, then you speak to the lawyer of that operator, they tell you a different thing. So then you have to weigh up, okay, and then you have to go to the regulator. And obviously at that time, the KSA was super, super busy because of all of those essentially licenses and those applications that they had to go through. So yeah, it was a bit challenging. But I mean, to be honest, like, to me, that's the most fun part, really, and that's why that's why I think the gaming sector is so popular for compliance and legal people. Because if you work for a bank, you might have like one or two things a year that might be a little bit, you have to work against something. But our sector is constantly changing. You all of a sudden your commercial director comes to you and says, well, I want to go into Mexico now. Oh, well, I want to go into Japan now, or whatever it is, right? So, and that's really the beauty of it, because you kind of evolve, you adapt, and you also overcome those challenges with essentially all of that. So, but yeah, going back to your original question, I think, yeah, Netherlands, Brazil would probably, let's say, tricky ones. But again, it's just, if you take the time to do it, if you don't rush it, like eventually after one or two sprints, you will get it done. And obviously, yeah, with the right input again, um, and I would say those are the the two most interesting ones for us.
Okay.
I mean, again, obviously, there's other jurisdictions, like an example, Germany, that are way more challenging for the operators themselves, because of they have to apply for a license in German. So yeah, here goes your budget for a translator. But yeah, I think, yeah, those two for us. But I mean, on an operator side, I know there's a lot of regulations that are super, super hard, and where a lot of work has to go in.
Okay. Okay. So we have the Netherlands and then Brazil. I suggest we have like a different webinar for Brazil because that could be so tricky. But what about Marisa, from your perspective and knowledge and experience, which are the trickiest, most challenging jurisdictions from a compliant, regulatory, and technical compliance perspective in the gambling industry?
Well, I think that each jurisdiction has its particularities, so you cannot really relax on any of them. But if I have to pick up one, like from the operator side, I think like UK has a lot of vast regulation, and like it's really complex. Also, the experience of the regulators itself, the UKGC have a lot of experience. They know to ask the right questions, so you can really feel that difference.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I'd support Maria in that UK, and with the new consultation also on responsible gambling, which they delayed last year because it was almost they gave operators 3 months to become technically compliant, with a philosophy that's almost impossible to become compliant in. It's like, seriously. So they've asked for another consultation, which we very much welcome, because meeting the challenging part of it technically is a big hurdle for us, because you're trying to get around the complexity again, what do they mean? What do they mean? So you're talking with advisors, you're talking with suppliers, and you adopt in best terms yourself what they mean, and then try to implement it with support from suppliers and internal technical teams. But I would say yes, the UK is very challenging. I used to
Mhm.
think that Italy was challenging, but Italy is very clear. Spain is very clear. I remember getting the UK or the US license many years ago. We thought that was challenging, but that's a breeze now. Yeah, the UK will always be one of those developing regulations, and it's constantly evolving, the UK. So trying to keep up and trying to meet their requirements at all times, is our goal everywhere and every jurisdiction. But the UK is particularly challenging, I would say.
Yeah, and I
Mhm.
think the challenge or the biggest challenge that the UKGC has is that they're actually not talking to the suppliers, so they don't know what is technically possible with any of those things. Because it's great to have a great idea, but if we cannot support it with technology, um, also it's not scalable or not reasonable to expect that done, to be manually, because otherwise you're going to have to open call centers with 10,000 people in them in order to go, through all of those things. So some regulators are really, really great when it comes to that. They do speak to technology suppliers to see what is actually possible and what's a reasonable thing to do. And yeah, I mean, quite frankly, I mean, the UKGC has a lot to learn on that
Mhm.
topic.
Well, they have a lot to learn, but they've been in this show for a while now. But I think that the main question here is, it's very typical to ask what the regulator means, but I think it should be focused on what is meant, not this specific regulator, because regulators, they come and go. Perhaps the public servants who first drafted the regulation are not even there. Then the regulators change, and therefore I always think that each operator and each provider should adapt in the most flexible way, and again be able to prove that they did everything that was in their knowledge to be able to comply if and when some of these regulations get too complex, because there are direct instructions from the European Union that regulators, laws, not all regulators, but legislation and of course development regulation cannot constrain the development of the industries. So I think that we're a little bit borderline, and this is obviously also a personal comment. We are in some jurisdictions getting borderline with how strict the regulations are in order to comply with an objective. So that's, that, as I said, it's a personal comment. And I do think that in certain jurisdictions it's a little bit easier due to the facilities that the state already has. For example, in Spain, we have the central registry of banned people, then which is quite unique in all of the jurisdictions. And there's also, as in other jurisdictions, the provision of that database where the operator can connect and do their double checking. And I'm sure, Roger, that makes your life easier. But then there are other jurisdictions where are they're less tools, and it's more up to the provider as ID now to establish the tools to be compliant with the KYC. So I don't think there's a worse or a better model, but I just believe that again, all the strict regulation that is attached to a specific type of technology in time can be prejudice to operators' compliance at the end of the day. And correct me if I'm wrong, Mari Fendi, if this is not becoming a challenge in itself to comply technically wise, how the regulator wants at that moment. And
Mhm.
that's the best direction to go
Yeah.
to.
100%.
I think collaboration between, as Roger was saying, collaboration between the regulator and the industry in general is absolute a must. Being isolated, in my mind, they're sitting in a room, they're all going together, they're very clever people, but they don't always get how the industry works. They don't understand how technology is meant to work. They don't understand the implementation and the timing of events. We've got training, we've got advisory sessions, we've got everything that goes into running a gambling organization, which is very complex. They should be working with us a lot closer. Nobody wants a problem gambler. Nobody wants fraud. We don't want any of that because it doesn't support our business. It's not sustainable, you know? But it seems to be that's what they're telling us all the time. You know, you have to stop this. We don't want it anyway. So please, if you're fraudsters or problem gamblers, stay away from our door. But they're just trying to make it just impossible for an ordinary person. You know, they want us to interrupt, stop them, and it's creating quite a black market. You know, if they're restricting advertising, how do you know who's legit then? You know, they're asking you to jump through so many hurdles before you even on board, and people like their privacy. You know, we don't give credit, so why are we asking them to hand over all of this information before we even let them enter the place or online casino? You know. It's quite a big challenge. And yes, we pick and choose between the markets, which ones we want to go there, because sometimes it's not really worth the effort.
Yeah, good point. Good point. So there's another opinion from Aurélie Rigaudin stating that not only you need the lawyers, but you need the technical compliance experts, which I absolutely agree. There's a big barrier, and from my personal experience and perspective, I have background in IT law, but that doesn't mean I'm going to know exactly how all the functions of the platform work. We're not miracle workers, right? We need that help. So yes, that's another person that's very important for these teams and need to work hand with the in-house compliance lawyers and external as well. I definitely, since a couple of years now, every time I have to advise on compliance and it's something related to technical compliance, we do it jointly with our technical compliance collaborators. We do it jointly because they have their legal doubts, we have our technical doubts, so we definitely need to join mental forces to give solutions to operators and providers in this sense. And obviously it's something else that needs to be taken into account, another person to work with. So Roger, is this something that you're experiencing as well? Do you have specific technical experts on the team in order to understand these regulations from the technical perspective?
Oh yes, of course. Yeah, 100%. I mean, it has to. In the end of the day, like as we already mentioned it also in regards to the regulator, you know, we need to understand how we can, you know, translate this into the technology, right? So it's all good and well knowing, hey, this is ABC, but actually, how do I translate it into the software, knowing what to do when A is X and B is Y and C is Z, right? So you have to evaluate those things, and that takes the longest time because you need to figure out how you're gonna write the code. You need to know how to write the algorithms, etc. So yeah, 100%. And I mean, rightly pointed out by Michele there. You know, compliance tech, you know, consultants or compliance tech, you know, people, you know, whatever the job role is, they're 100% super important in order to translate it into the real technology.
Marika, is this something that you've experience? Do you need these translators to help you with your own role?
I 100% agree. We cannot live without that because we really need like to have strong technical guys on board. Brainstorming sessions like during the different phases of the license. For example, license application. Obviously, you need to conduct the gap analysis and to see how it's going to be implemented within the organization, and then like a new legislation coming into force. So yeah, 100%.
Okay, great. So we have another question before we enter the last 10 minutes of the webinar. Rui Pedro Passos Pinto, what a nice name, is asking, what kind of balance do you recommend on the establishment of the KYC policy in AML and GDPR standards? And sometimes these two regulations could collide because the implementation of these two regulations is different in several jurisdictions, even in the EU. Okay, so the question exactly is, it's a very broad question. How do you balance the compliance between KYC and AML and GDPR? Well, actually, you touched upon that, right? There's a thin line between us protecting consumers from consumers from vulnerable consumers from playing in on our website. I'm saying our because I'm including myself, on our websites, and also we have to protect society in it as a whole from AML, from fraud, et cetera, et cetera. But there's the privacy that Dee mentioned. Is the protection of me becoming a risk gambler or a pathological gambler more relevant than all my GDPR rights? I think that was the point. I think that was the point that this person that Rio was asking. Uh, I'll let you answer that now, but from my knowledge, it is quite a balancing act many times from not only one legislation from another legislation, but more so from constitutional rights even to specific regulations that sometimes the requirements that our gambling legislation and developing regulation establish don't seem quite proportionate, and don't abide by the standards of equilibrium that are requested in within all the legislation. Well, when Rio, you feel that there is something that's colliding, one gambling legislation or regulation is not respecting other type of legislation or even the Constitution, well, that is the moment to use the tools, from my understanding, is the moment to use the tools that your jurisdiction has in order to fight that disproportion with among the laws. There are, for example, that was one perspective that the advertisement regulation was understood to have in Spain. It is understood that perhaps it is not abiding by freedom of company, freedom of speech, etc., etc. Well, there are tools in each jurisdiction to fight against this. So that from a preliminary perspective. But Di Marije, Roger, what would you answer Ryu when he understands or she understands that there's a conflict between all these regulations that is making it difficult to actually comply?
I think it's a very, very good question. And we've all been there, right? We're all going, okay, well, we get a request for data. What are we meant to do? How do we hand it over? Is the right philosophy? Is this the right format? What is the GDPR? What do the privacy laws say? And then we're looking at mental health, big elephant in the room when it comes to gambling addiction. How do we tackle that? What about the regulators saying you should work together to combat problem gambling? We're restricted there. We've got these walls up between us. We can't be sharing data. So, it's a lot more thought has to be go into being able to fight gambling addiction, preventing people signing up and supporting that, and the person's right to privacy. While also using your providers to say, okay, are they really the person that they say they are, or are they just signing up because they want to evade detection? It is, there is we all have to have those requirements for collecting the information, finding out who that person is, and monitoring their activity, and then interacting. And then your level of interaction you have to get right as well. And you cannot be a philosopher. It's a minefield for sure. And it's not an easy question to answer, is what I would say.
No. Anything to add, Roger, Marije?
I fully agree. It's not an easy question. I mean, if we are talking like doubts with its data or AML, obviously AML should have like over hierarchy, but still not an easy question. Just contact like the right stakeholders within the organization, DPO, head of AML, and try to find like the suitable solution.
Make a decision,
Yeah.
correct? Okay. Well, we are 3 minutes towards the end of the webinar, but I do want to launch a question here. How do we, in talking about balances, how can we balance risk management versus economic gains? Is this something that is on top of the table now for operators? And is this something that providers can also be part of? As we began this webinar stating that compliance years ago was seen part of a problem, it's not seen anymore. But again, how do we balance this act?
I think, to be honest, in a way, one enables the other. So if your risk management is correct, your economic gains will also be good. So it's I guess, but obviously there's many factors that go into this, right? I think it then depends on what is the jurisdiction, what is the kind of tax situation, what's the kind of the whole situation, right? I mean, you have to take that into your thinking. I think probably you don't even need to talk risk management if you go into the US, because your economic gains will probably be zero or even in the minus. So we don't need to talk about risk management there. But if you have certain markets, yes, if you have the right risk management, and again it comes back to the conversation we just had before. If you have the right mindset in compliance that is top down, then it will become natural to that company, and those economic gains will be enabled by by the whole risk management, and also by the whole compliance culture, I would say, right? So yeah, I would say one enables the other. And just one thing that that came into my mind to the before question is it was about the collaboration. I think yes, everyone wants to fight gambling addiction, but if you do not give the operators the right data in order to make those educated decisions, we will never get to a point where we can find where we can fight gambling addiction. And we always say, look, financial services, the industry should come together with gambling. But I would also flip it around and say, and give actually more responsibility to the CRAs in the respectable countries, because they hold all of that data, and they must find a way how to display it in a way where, yes, GDPR is obeyed, the privacy laws are obeyed, but still you get some sort of input what that person can afford to gamble per month, in example, without having to go through bank statements and whatever. Sorry, just went off on a tangent, but I thought it was just very important to say that as well, in order to support the operators. But yes, I think economic gains and risk management, they go hand in hand, wherever you are in gambling really right now.
Correct. Di Marika, do you disagree with Roger's statement?
Not at all. I think that balance, cooperation, we are working towards the same goal. So that's the key for the success.
I totally agree. Evaluating your risks, looking at your options, you can choose an option that best suits your purse string for sure, while maintaining compliance. And the higher the risk, the more focus you should be putting on it.
Excellent. Well, I believe we are finished with the time that ID now gave us for this webinar. It's been a pleasure being with you, Dee, Marija, Roger. Thank you again, ID now and SBC, for having such a productive conversation. And again, thanks everybody and the listeners as well.
Thank you
Bye-bye.
very much.
Thank you very much.
Thanks a lot, guys. Thank you.
Take care. Bye-bye.